I have a dream too.
원칙이 바로선 자본주의.
Conduct? Not conduct.
안녕하십니까. 밝은의 광장의 김휘종입니다. 한 번도 경험해보지 못한 나라에서 힘겹게 살고 있는 지금 박근혜 대통령님의 신뢰의 리더십, 원칙 있고 깨끗한 지도력이 그립습니다. 이번 영상은 그런 박근혜 대통령님의 정신이 고스란히 담겨 있다고 해도 과언이 아닌 연설을 소개하고자 합니다. 2009년 미국 스탠퍼드 대학의 아시아 태평양 연구소에서 아시아 퍼시픽 리더십 포럼 행사가 있었는데 박근혜 대통령님 당시에는 국회의원으로 전 한나라당 대표로 초청을 받으셨습니다. 2009년 5월 6일 그 행사의 초청 강연으로 대북 문제 등을 포함한 한반도 정세와 한미 관계 등을 주제로 한 강연인데 스탠퍼드 대학 재학생, 교수, 교민 등 300여 명이 몰려 성황을 이뤘습니다. 미국 서브프라임 모기지 부실로 시작된 글로벌 금융위기의 여파로 전 세계가 어려움에 처해 있던 2009년 당시 대통령님께서 화두로 던졌던 원칙이 바로선 자본주의가 주목받았습니다. 현재는 중국에서 시작된 코로나 사태로 인해 전 세계가 금융위기 때보다 더 심각하다는 위기감이 있는데 우리나라는 왠지 거꾸로 가는 것 같습니다. 2012년 대선 당시 박근혜 후보의 대통령 출마 선언문에 대해서 알고 싶으면 스탠퍼드 초청 강연문을 읽어보라 라는 말이 있을 정도로 대통령님의 가치관이 잘 드러난 연설입니다. 연설 초반엔 대북 문제를 말씀하셨고 중반부터는 경제 문제를 말씀하셨으니 끝까지 시청해 주시기 바랍니다. 좋아요, 구독 눌러주시고 박근혜 대통령께서 하루빨리 자유의 몸이 되셔서 밝은의 광장으로 나오시는 그날까지 후원과 응원 부탁드리겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Amakost, for your introduction, and I appreciate your nice compliments. Mr. Schoenstein, Ambassador Amakost, Professor Shin, distinguished guests. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to meet you all here at Stanford University, where brilliant minds interact and collaborate to lead your country and lead the world. I'm particularly excited to be here because Stanford University holds a very special place in the history of the Republic of Korea and in my own heart. This afternoon, I visited the Thurman Engineering Center to celebrate the memory of the late Professor Fred Thurman. To you, Professor Thurman is probably known as the father of Silicon Valley, but to us in Korea, he is someone to whom we will be forever grateful for the role he played in developing our industry, nurturing science and technology, and creating KAIST, Korea's foremost institute for science and technology. I remember that my father, as President of Korea, spent a great deal of his time thinking about how he could build a brighter future for the country. At that time, Korea was a country that had been devastated by 36 years of cruel colonial rule, national division, and the Korean War that left the country in ruin. With no resources, no money, no technology, and a people weary from poverty, the top priority of Korea's leaders was to put the country back on its own 2 feet. My father determined that the only way for Korea to rise again was for it to pursue export-oriented industrialization as a national goal, and that a solid foundation of science and technology would be needed in order for this to happen. And with that, a goal was set, and off we went. And in my own way of contributing to my father's efforts, I chose to study electronics engineering as my college major. Back then, our per capita GDP was only $300, but we had boldly resolved to establish a specialized graduate school that would focus solely on nurturing talented scientists and engineers. The problem then was how. It was at this point that we turned to Professor Thurman at Stanford University for his advice. During the 5 years from 1970 to 1975, Professor Thurman visited Korea on 5 different occasions and selflessly provided us with his assistance and expertise. As I mentioned, I chose to study electronics engineering at school, so I heard quite a lot about the many great things that Professor Thurman had been doing in the US, and was also very interested in what he was doing for Korea. Professor Thurman's counsel eventually led to the creation of KAIST, the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, which has since become a breeding ground for top-level science and technology talent. In 1975, the Republic of Korea presented Professor Thurman a medal in appreciation of his contribution to the development of science and technology in Korea. Today, I would like to once again express my deepest gratitude for all that the late Professor Thurman did for Korea, and I would also like to thank Stanford University for all the support you provided so that such a distinguished professor could come to help a country in need. The seeds that were first sown back then have since grown into trees bearing the fruit of cell phones, LCDs, and semiconductors that are now sought after throughout the world. Korea's shipbuilding industry currently has a 50% share in the global market, and Korea is now 5th in the world in terms of automobile production. In less than 2 decades, Korea went through a miraculous transformation. Yes, the hard work of the Korean people played a big role in this development, but I know very well that none of this would have been possible without the support of the United States and Stanford University in particular. I hope that Stanford University will continue to engage broadly in in-depth academic cooperation with the universities and research centers of Korea. Together, I hope that we can work towards the further development not just of our 2 countries, but all of mankind. Developments in science, technology continue to bring the countries of the world closer together. The IT revolution that started in the Silicon Valley has enabled people throughout the world to keep connected through a single handset, and even the stock prices of the world seem to fluctuate in sync with one another. In all areas, we are witnessing greater interdependence and more organic connections. In this connected world, issues that arise in one corner of the world can no longer be isolated within a country or a region's boundaries. U.S. issues no longer just concerns the U.S. Middle East issues no longer just concern Iran or Israel. And Korean Peninsula issues no longer just concern the 2 Koreas. These are all our issues, issues that we have to resolve together. This is true for the current global economic crisis and for the North Korean nuclear issue. Let me first turn to North Korea's nuclear issue. 30 months have passed since North Korea provocatively pushed through with its nuclear test in 2006. Just this last April, despite concern expressed throughout the international community, North Korea went ahead and launched a long-range missile. The UN Security Council issued a chairman's statement condemning the launch, and North Korea responded by promptly declaring that it would quit the six-party talks. North Korea also recently expelled IAEA inspectors who had been overseeing the disablement of the North Korea's nuclear facilities and started reprocessing its spent fuel rods. The ramifications of this issue are not confined to the Korean Peninsula. The North's actions constitute a clear threat to the stability of Northeast and to peace in the world. I hold the opinion that there should be no nuclear weapons whatsoever on the Korean Peninsula. The North's nuclear program must be completely eliminated, and under no circumstances should we recognize North Korea as a nuclear state. The complete elimination of the North Korean nuclear program is the prerequisite for any possible establishment of a lasting peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and will be the cornerstone for global peace. Many policies and various efforts have been applied in attempts to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue. Unfortunately, none has been very successful. Over the past 15 years, a clear pattern, however, has emerged. North Korea creates a crisis. We negotiate and end up rewarding them for their behavior. The North creates another crisis, and we talk and reward them again. When negotiations break down, we can accurately predict that the U.S. will blame North Korea for not keeping its promise, while the North will condemn the U.S. for not keeping its word. Every time, it's the same story. It is now high time that we break this vicious circle. For this to happen, we need to look back and think about what went wrong and take a comprehensive look at what we now need to do. I believe that before the new U.S. administration establishes its North Korean policy, it needs to take some time for an interim evaluation of the previous policies. Only when you know exactly what was wrong and what was right about the past solutions can you expect to develop a new solution that is more realistic. Back in 1994, the Geneva Agreement was reached as a solution to the first North Korean nuclear crisis, which involved nuclear development in Yongbyon. In 2003, the six-party talks were launched in response to the second North Korean nuclear crisis, which focused on the North HEU program. This mechanism did lead to some positive effects in terms of providing a framework for the resolution of this issue. But still, the situation deteriorated, and North Korea went on to conduct a to conduct a nuclear test. North Korea's threats toward the South have also gone one step further, as they now threaten to turn South Korea into ashes whereas they used to just say that they would turn Seoul into an inferno. Since the launch of the six-party talks, these separate agreements were made, one in September 2005, another in February 2007, and the last in October 2007. Each time we kept our fingers crossed with the hope that finally the North Korean nuclear issue will be resolved, but were ultimately disappointed. North Korea's brinkmanship always seemed to worsen the situation, and in the midst of the confusion, North Korea simply gains more time to take one step closer to its goal of becoming a nuclear state. What should we do? Frankly, there does not seem to be an easy way out. How can we work to peacefully break this vicious circle that we have locked ourselves into? This is the question that we are all tasked with, Korea, the US, and the world, both you and me. One thing that I'm sure of is that we cannot let ourselves repeat the patterns of the past, and we simply cannot allow any nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. Many discussions are currently underway on this issue. Some say that we shouldn't just wait for North Korea to come back to the table, but hold five-party talks to resolve any differences between the remaining five parties and discuss measures toward the elimination of North Korea's nuclear program. Some say that if North Korea wants direct talks with the US should oblige on the condition that the North eliminates its nuclear program and make room for a possible breakthrough. Some say that we should just completely ignore the North. Each approach has its merits, but right now, all of the solution lies in the hands of North Korea. Ultimately, I believe that we will need a more comprehensive initiative that breaks out of the mold of existing mechanisms. You may recall that some time ago, the US came forth with the Perry process, which had bipartisan support and consent. We now need something that goes beyond bipartisan agreement, a framework that can pull together the US, China, the two Koreas, Russia, Japan, and all concerned nations into a process that builds agreement on a common Northeast Asian peace policy. We would not just deal with the North Korean nuclear issue, but broaden our scope and focus to establish peace in Northeast Asia. We would develop a multilateral security process that supports the goal of building a lasting regime of peace in the region, and the North Korean nuclear issue would be dealt within the context of that process. Some says a non-aggression agreement between North Korea and the US could be helpful, but I believe that it would be much more preferable to create an environment that can truly foster lasting peace. For many years, I have believed that we need to break out of the existing structure of ad hoc meetings and create a more effective framework in the form of a permanent Northeast Asian body for peace and cooperation. We could strengthen our cooperation and broaden exchange to form an economic community that could develop into a security community. And then I believe that we could step beyond passive peacemaking, where we resolve issues such as the North Korean nuclear issue as they arise, and instead engage in active peace building as we seek to ensure that peace and prosperity reigns throughout Northeast Asia. There would be no losers, but only winners in this Northeast Asian peace process. for I believe that it would create new value for everyone involved. I am aware of the international efforts being led by former Secretary Schultz and former Secretary Perry to create a nuclear-free world. I understand that President Obama has also called for a nuclear-free world as part of his vision for the United States. Korea is most likely your strongest ally on this vision. Since 1991, while promoting the peaceful use of nuclear power, we have very firmly stood by our non-nuclear policy that opposes the development and possession of nuclear weapons. I believe that the vision of a nuclear-free world must start with a denuclearized Korean peninsula. I sincerely hope that President Obama's vision is realized first in North Korea. And if we join forces, I'm confident that we can make this happen. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past half century, Korea and the US have worked together to reach a common dream. We want to build a world of freedom, safety, and abundance, a world in which, with hard work, everyone can realize their goals. It was for this very dream that we fought together in the Korean War, in Vietnam, and in Iraq. Unfortunately, however, the past several years were not so helpful to our relationship. There were many worries and several perplexing incidents. But for me, our relationship can be summed up very succinctly. There really is nothing more to say. We fought together in fight for freedom. Ours is an alliance forged in blood. What's important now is that we upgrade and transform this alliance so that together we can serve all mankind. I believe that our alliance should shift from an alliance that preserves existing values to an alliance that creates new value. New value means that the alliance between the two nations finds solutions to the challenges that are presented before Korea, the US, and the world at large. We are facing many challenges. The concept of security now encompasses military threats, economic crisis, environmental degradation, political and social chaos, and various other dangers. In this era of globalization, security is no longer manageable at the national level. Only through global cooperation will we be able to keep our people secure. In searching for solutions to global issues such as the global financial crisis, the North Korean nuclear issue, peace on the Korean Peninsula, international terrorism, climate change, and socio-economic disparities, Korea and the US could create new value for our long-lasting alliance. I believe that when our alliance embraces the vision of becoming an alliance for all mankind, and when it reaches out beyond the political and military stability on the Korean Peninsula and seeks new value in bringing about peace and prosperity throughout Northeast Asia, then it will become a truly attractive alliance that is fully supported and welcomed by our neighbors and by countries throughout the world. I truly hope that we will be able to build this attractive alliance together. The economy is another area that we must work on together. The global economy is currently experiencing the worst crisis since the Second World War. This crisis is not respecting any national borders, and no country can hope of escaping unscathed by itself. this crisis has shown us that we really all do share a common fate. I believe that now is the time for Korea, the US, and the countries of the world to pool our wisdom and our strength, to think deeply about how we can better prepare ourselves and cooperate to overcome this crisis, and particularly think about what the future of capitalism should look like as we search for the path to greater prosperity. I see 3 challenges to the global economy. In the private sector, the challenge is greed. The fixation on maximizing profits led to the neglect of responsibilities and ignorance towards the common good. Governments face the challenge of insufficient and inadequate governance. They fail to keep up with changes in the market and fail to care for their people in need. And the world faces the challenges of protectionism. If we all bolt our doors closed, no one will ever see the light again. Unfortunately, there have been signs of countries blaming other countries, with protectionism rearing its head through the crack created by the crisis. These are bringing upon our world the challenge of undisciplined capitalism. To rise above this crisis and to continue on the path toward sustained development, we need to establish some discipline at a very fundamental level. Capitalism has at its foundation the value of responsibility. Hence, capitalism can only be sustained when this core value is respected. Once the concept of responsibility is weakened, then capitalism itself is at risk. And it is what we may have briefly forgotten. To establish disciplined capitalism, each economic player must change the orientation of their thoughts. We need to build consensus among all the economic players that genuine growth and sustainable profits can be attained only when individual gains and the common good converge. The practice of maintaining excessive leverage and the undiscerning transaction of derivatives are examples of greed, where the highest value is placed on attaining higher yields. Unless we can keep this moral hazard in check, the markets are bound to fail again. We need to ensure that the interests of shareholders and other stakeholders are balanced, as we urge businesses to strengthen their ethical conduct. Second, the role and the functions of the government should be defined anew. This crisis came about from a mismatch between the market and its overseers. Governments must ensure that there are no blind spots in their oversight of the market. I'm not calling for government to intervene in every aspect of our economic life, but governments must definitely strengthen their role of preventing any issues from becoming greater problems in the market economy. I also believe that governments need to embrace a wide spectrum of perspectives in terms of monitoring and supervising the financial sector. At the same time, government needs to take good care of the more vulnerable groups in society. This should not be simple charity. I believe that each individual should receive support so that they can utilize their own talents to participate in generating GDP. For the final goal of economic development should always be to ensure that everyone, including the vulnerable, participates in building a community where happiness is shared by all. And third, globally, we need to build a new system for cooperation. No country can survive alone in this globalized era. Our key words are survive together and prosper together. So now we need to step forward and work to eliminate poverty and dissolve the socio-economic disparity that exists in our world. To this end, we need to ensure the free flow of goods and capital across borders, and also work to expand our exchange in human resources, technology, and information. In this regard, we also need to deepen and strengthen the system for economic cooperation between Korea and the US. The FTA is of course important here, but we also need to establish more substantial systems of cooperation that could focus on specific segments of the local economy. This time of crisis is painful for us all, but throughout history, the human race has resiliently risen above such pain to take a big step forward. I hope that by taking the warnings of this current crisis to heart, the world is able to establish a truly disciplined capitalism. Then I'm sure that the global economy will be stronger and the people will be happier. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States was once called the first new nation in the context of the 18th century European civilization. In the context of the Western civilization of the 20th century, Korea is one of the post-war new nations. The US was a success story as the original new nation, and now Korea is here as a success story among the post-war new nations. The US is a truly great country, not because of your economic or military strength, but because of the dream that you instill in the hearts of everybody around the world. The dream of freedom and the American dream that with hard work, anyone can succeed in life. Every country has its trials and tribulations, but as we watched you elect President Obama as your president, the world saw once again that the American dream was still very much alive. The path that Korea must take is also a path towards shared dreams. 50 years ago, all the difficulties faced by third world countries were manifested in Korea. Under such dire conditions, the Korean people took the American values of freedom and democracy as a foundation for growth. With unfaltering courage, unwavering confidence, and devotion to the community, we managed to build a country that is now an industrialized democracy that is leading the digital era. Korea has shown the third world countries of the world that anything is possible. This Korean development model is a success story for third world modernization that Korea and the US could present before the world as a vision for further growth. I hope that together, Korea and the United States can be a source of hopeful dreams for the people of the world. I have a dream too. I dream of a Republic of Korea where all the people are happy. And I dream of a Republic of Korea that helps the people of the world to be happy. I truly hope that Korea and the US can contribute to building happier lives for all mankind. In the past century, Korea was a battlefield for many wars between major powers. Japan, China, and Russia competed fiercely to increase their presence in Korea, and the country was ravaged by wars waged between them. The 21st century is the era of the Asia-Pacific and Korea must not be used as a launching pad for attacks against each other, but instead should become a hub for peace, where the countries of the Asia-Pacific engage in peaceful cooperation for peaceful coexistence. For this to actually happen, there is a lot of work that we must do together, and I'm confident that we can do this together. I sincerely hope that history will forever remember Korea and the U.S. as close partners who opened new horizons for peace and prosperity throughout the world. Once again, I thank everyone at Stanford University so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.